Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings everyone. In this video we are going to talk about writing the discussion section of a scientific article, and also if you are writing for the monograph, a thesis for the master's or for the PhD, discussion section as the fifth chapter. Uh, Now that you have analyzed your data, it is the time for you to write down your discussion section. The discussion section is somehow challenging, and it's the most difficult part in a research article. And also, we can say that this part is the most important part uh, for the writer to successfully demonstrate his or her critical thinking, how to organize his or her major findings. Uh, in addition to that, discussion section expands our knowledge in the field of study. One thing, as a researcher, we have to keep in mind that always, all the time, when we are writing the discussion section, we have to consider our readers, because it helps them to understand the entire study. Okay, when you're writing the discussion section, it's important to know what to include in the discussion section. So there are six major elements to include in the discussion. The first one is summary of the findings, interpretation of the findings, compare your findings with the other previously conducted researches, implications of the findings, evaluation of the study, which is limitations, and finally, recommendations for the future research. We will discuss each and every one of them in details with some practical examples. All right. The first one is state your major findings of the study. This is going to be the first sentence in your paragraph in your discussion section. Uh, this is you have to briefly state your major findings without providing a lot of details and without providing some repeated information. Unlike in your data analysis where you provided some numbers, percentages, means, and standard deviation with a lot of details. However, in this part or in discussion section, you have to summarize your major findings, which means briefly state without providing the numbers, the percentages, all those things. Here is one example, as you can see here, as clearly. This is from here, as you can see. This is this is the major finding for my study. As you can see here in this example, the highlighted part, this is one of my major findings here. As you can see, there are no numbers included in this part, or some percentages. So this is, we can say in short, this is a briefly summarized findings of my research article. Okay, moving on to the next part. After you briefly summarized your one of your major findings, the next step is to provide interpretations and meanings of your major findings. The purpose of this is that the interpretations and the meaning, it will help the readers not to refer back to the data analysis with a lot of details. Here he will or she will understand what your findings mean, what are they, what are the interpretations of your major findings. As you can see here in this example, here the black color is the example from the previous slide, and this with the red color, this is the interpretation provided for this major findings. This is how you have to interpret. Okay, now moving on to the third element, which is relate or compare your findings to those of similar studies. After you are done with the summarization of your major findings and interpretations to that major findings, the third step is to compare your findings with the previously conducted researches or findings. Basically here, as you can see, there are two things important. The first one is, as you can see with the red color or the highlighted part, is to support or confirm, and also your findings must be different from those of other findings. To give you a clear picture, your findings must support or must be supported by other findings, or must be different from those of other research findings. For example, here, this is I might refer back to the previous slide. Here, this was my one of my major findings, and this is the interpretation for that. So I didn't write this in this slide because this this entire sentence, as you can see in highlighted part, this part, all these researchers till here, this is their findings or their result which supports or confirms my findings. So this is how it supported or confirmed my findings. Another way, this can either be different from your findings. For example, here it says okay, low proficiency of students in EFL classes were amongst the key challenges. If you want to provide a difference between your findings and with other findings, which means you are comparing your findings with other research findings, you can simply state here that you can begin from here. All these researchers came to the conclusion that grammar-based examination, large classes, and low proficiency of students in EFL classes were not, just simply put the word not, amongst the key challenges. It means this, you cannot purposely put the word not here. This means that this should be stated in the research articles, which means you found something different from their researches. And this is how you have to compare your findings with the previously conducted research findings. In short, we can say your findings must be either supported or confirmed, or it can be different from those of previously conducted research findings. Now moving on to the next part or the next element, which is implications or relevance of the findings. In this part, you are stating how these findings contribute, or how can these findings contribute to your research problem. What do you have to suggest here? What is the purpose of this research? what did you do, or what are you going to suggest? What are the implications of this study? The examples are all here. For example, this is my finding, and this can be the implication with the red color. This can be the implication of my research, or in short, we can say my findings. And also in the second example, as you can see here, also the red part, or the highlighted part, this says that this can imply my one of my major findings. The fifth element of this video is evaluation of the study, particularly the limitations. To be more precise, you are identifying the limitations, the weaknesses, the shortcomings. In other words, we can say the flaws that you faced during your research. You identify all those shortcomings. One thing to keep in mind that this is most of the researchers, they are afraid of stating their limitations, that this will cause the rejection of their paper from publication. No, it's not the case. In fact, this is one of the positive points for the researchers to explain what are the limitations of their research article or their research. Basically, these shortcomings basically refers to the research design, statistical model constraints, or funding constraints, or there might be some other factors which are out of researchers' control. Um, in fact, even the best researches which they are published in one of the privileged journals, they consist these limitations, and this can also provide the opportunity for the researcher to recommend some future researchers. Uh, One thing the researchers need to keep in mind, that if they don't criticize or if they don't state their own limitations, the reviewers, they are looking for the limitations. They will find out what are your limitations. So this is the best way for you to state your limitations or the shortcomings. And also keep in mind that you have to provide some reasons of those shortcomings you faced during your research, and also provide some improvements, or propose some ways for the improvements for the researchers not to repeat those similar mistakes that you did. Here is the one example. In this example, as you can see, my limitation can be public university, particularly let's say Kandahar University, and also the sample size, which is 32 EFL teachers. Here I can say that these two are my limitations, and I can, in order to provide some reasons why they are the limitations, I can say that for the future researchers, I can recommend that if they want to conduct a similar research or in the same topic, they have to extend their population to other public universities as well, and meanwhile they can increase the number of the sample size, like this thing. To give you a clear picture, there are some other examples in the following slide. In this example too, as you can see, uh, my limitation can be the quantitative approach. For example, you can suggest This is, for example, your limitation, and you can provide the reasons why it is your limitation, and what do you suggest, or what do you propose for improvement, or what are those changes that the future researchers can make. It is here they can employ, my proposal is to they can employ the interview, and also they can observe the classes in order to have a good or a fruitful research. In the third example, the instrument, again the questionnaire, again this is the quantitative approach. uh, why is it the limitation? Because dishonest responses, rushed responses, which may affect my findings. So what do you propose for modification? We can say that the researcher can use qualitative approach, in particular interview or observation. Also, in the last example, you can say that um, my findings could not be generalized to all areas of Afghanistan. Because why it cannot be generalized? Because I only selected my sample from urban areas and also suburban areas. So what do I suggest here? What do I propose? I propose that they can future if somebody wants to conduct a research in the future, they can consider rural areas, let's say rural areas, to have a fruitful research. uh, so in short, we can say identify your limitations or your shortcomings, and provide reasons why they are your limitations, or why are they the shortcomings you face during your research. And also make one proposal or couple of proposes for modifications. What do you suggest for future researchers not to repeat the same mistakes? So now let's move on to the next part. The final or the last element is to make recommendations. Now that you have identified the limitations for your research, it is the time to make some recommendations based on your limitations. You have your limitations, and consider those limitations and provide some recommendations. For example, for correlational studies, further researches in public or in private universities would be useful. And if you considered in your study only male respondents or participants, you can recommend that other researchers, they have to, in the future, they have to consider female respondents as well, or you can say, or you can suggest both genders. And also in the previous slide, as I said, um, if you considered for your study urban or suburban areas, in the future you suggest to other researchers that they can consider or include rural areas. Okay, so far we discussed the things to include in the discussion section. Also, there are some things, or there are some other elements to avoid in the discussion section, which means not to include in the discussion section. The first one is the data, or the data, nothing more. It means try to avoid the repetition of the findings. Try not to include too much details in your findings in the discussion part, because you already stated or you already mentioned in your data analysis with details. So in the discussion part, stated briefly, summarize basically. The second point is presenting new data in discussion. For example, let's say you had in your data analysis, you came up with four major findings which supports your data or which supports your entire research paper. Now that if you are writing the discussion section, just state those major findings. Try not to include some other findings which does not support your data. Stick with your findings, stick with your data. That's it. The third point is uh, unwarranted speculation. Unwarranted speculation. This means that try not to suggest this part to other, let's say, to other disciplines. For example, in my findings, I said that EFL lecturers supported the CLT approach. So in this part, I cannot say that this CLT approach is a useful teaching approach for some other disciplines, particularly for the math or for the physics. In other words, there is also one example. If the subject of your study had asthma, it is usually not appropriate to speculate about how your findings might apply to other patients' populations. To be more clear, let's say in these days this COVID-19 issue is very hot. Suppose if the researchers came up with a vaccine for the COVID-19, they cannot propose or they cannot speculate this particular vaccine which is appropriate or valid uh, for other patients. So you can only speculate your discussion, your main findings for particular discipline. The fourth thing not to include in your discussion is unwarranted inflation of the importance of the study results. Try not to provide unnecessary reasons for the importance of the study results. In fact, in this part, you have, for example, you have conducted a research which will make an important contribution to the human beings or to the community. So in this part, try not to explain or include some unnecessary reasons for the importance of your result. Try to avoid this. This will cause humiliation to your readers and reviewers, and also this will disgust your reviewers and your readers. The fifth point is tangential issues. What does it mean? Basically, it means if you are conducting a research, the aim of your research is to find the answers for your research questions. So in this stage, try to stick with your research questions or try to stick with your objectives. Try not to go beyond your objectives or beyond your research questions. It means try not to include something new, something which does not support your data. The sixth point is bully pulpit. This means as the researcher or the writer, try not to criticize or attack other studies. For example, you can it's not appropriate to say that this particular writer did not find, for example, there is the findings that was they were expected. So, or you can say that why the researcher did not consider female participants or respondents. So all these points should be considered in the discussion part. It means try not to include or in your discussion section. And finally, conclusion must be supported by your data. It means try to write a conclusion or try to come up with a conclusion that supports your data. Okay, this was a brief uh, description or explanation regarding writing the discussion section. I hope it becomes useful for the researchers to when they are writing their discussion section. Thank you very much.